Now it's on. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. My name's Julie Moore. I'm the Secretary of Natural Resources for the State of Vermont, and want to thank all of you community members, legislators, including Representative Morrissey, Representative Greer, and Senator Bongartz, as well as local leaders for joining us tonight. In addition to myself and Matt Chapman, who's the head of our Waste Management and Prevention Division, we're joined tonight by Trish Coppolino, Casey Cathan, and Richard Spies from our Waste Management Program. And we're going to provide an update on recent well sampling and site investigation work that has been ongoing largely to the south of Bennington. This is really the newest phase in what has been now a 10-year body of work to address PFAS contamination in the Bennington area. And Richard's going to walk you through a bunch of data. We're joined also by Jason Dolomich, who's the engineer supporting some of this work, who can provide an update on where that stands. And we'll leave plenty of time at the end to answer any questions you may have. And just want to share my thanks for your continued commitment to working with us to do what it takes to address this contamination. And so with that, I will turn it over to Richard.
Thanks, Julie. Well, I really have to start this presentation by saying that Malika Vincent really wanted to be here. She's actually devastated that she can't be, but she had a baby a month ago, and she's on maternity leave. And she's actually the one who put these slides together, so I can take no credit for it. And as most of you know, she's spoken with many of you, and she was the heavy lifter in getting data out to people and responding to the day-to-day stuff. Can I not? How about if I get closer? So I'm really here to give an update on the work we've done over the last 18 months in sampling what we call South Bennington, which is south of Route 9, and some areas up in Shaftesbury, and explain how we got here and what we found and what we're still doing moving forward. I'll give a very brief description of what happened back in 2016, just as it pertains to the work that we're doing now. So with that, general outline, I'll just give a quick, if any of you have been to PFAS meetings before, you've seen it, so I think it's only 1 or 2 slides. We'll talk about what is PFAS, some of the extent of the previous work that was done, recent work that we've done, the results, conclusions, next steps, and really the main reason we're here is Q&A to answer any questions that the community may have for what we're doing and what we can do to help you. So what is PFAS in? It's in so many products. Here's just a couple of examples. Scotchgard, I remember spraying it on my tents when I go camping, great water repellent. Firefighting foam, very high levels of PFAS in firefighting foam, and we have problems all over the country from that. And it's only a particular type of firefighting foam, Class B foam, for fighting oil fires, so we don't see much or any in what we use for wildland fires. And then in some of our cooking materials. But there's a whole host of, hundreds of other products that has PFAS in them. And there's a lot of work going on to try and start getting PFAS out of products, but I think we're very early in that process, and I know that the agency and the legislature will continue to work on that moving forward as more opportunities present themselves to get some of these chemicals out of our products. So what is PFAS? We use that acronym all the time. It stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. That's a real big name, but really what it means is we have carbons and we have fluorines, and they bond together. They form a really strong bond. They don't want to break apart. That's why they're called the forever chemical, and that's what gives them all the great properties for water repellent, UV protection, making things slide really well, like when you put wire into a cable. Man-made compound from the 50s, and it came to this part of the country very early on down in Pownell, when one of the locals moved back to bring industry to Pownell, and unfortunately PFAS was one of the byproducts of that manufacturing process. Very persistent in the environment, like I said, and I think most people agree that it can be harmful to human health, particularly at higher levels. Again, I already went through what it's in, so I don't need to go through that again. The main thing we need to know is most of the PFAS that we see in Bennington is PFOA, which is an 8-carbon PFAS. And the reason that's important is we use that information as we try and identify sources. There are many other, hundreds, thousands of other PFAS, and so, and we only analyze for a handful of them. Again, how does PFAS move? It can come out of the air as dry deposition, as what happened here. It moves through the soil during rain and snowmelt, makes it down to the water table, and then from there it can flow into surface water. And once it's in the superficial aquifer, there are places where it can make its way down into the bedrock aquifer, which is where most people get their private water wells water from. The current standard in Vermont is 20 parts per trillion for the sum of 5 different compounds, PFOA being only one of them. The other chemical that we see a lot with the PFOA is this PFHPA, and that's a 7-carbon PFAS. Very similar, just one fewer carbon. And we see that pretty consistently in almost all the wells. For most of you, if you've looked at your data, you see a very consistent ratio of PFOA to PFHPA of about 10 to 1. So what's the previous work we did? I mentioned that very briefly. As in 2016, ChemFab, we discovered PFAS there. As part of that work, we did extensive sampling both inside the area that we ended up thinking that there was the majority of the contamination, but also sampling many wells outside the area, south of Route 9, over towards the ChemFab factory in North Bennington. We sampled a dozen wells up in Shaftesbury, and when they were coming back either non-detect or maybe 2 parts per trillion, we thought, oh, it seems like it's mostly focused in this one area, and that's where we started very early on. Well, be it as it may, back in July of 2023, as part of a statewide effort to sample 500 wells to see how extensive the problem was statewide, 2 of those wells that were sampled were south of Route 9, one in the South Shire neighborhood and one up over on Hickory Hill Road. And one was up in, I'll get to Shaftesbury in a minute, sorry. And then one individual, based on those results, decided to sample their well themselves. All 3 of them had detects of PFAS above the state standard, and that led us to doing more work. So what did we do? We then sampled, after the 3 results came in, we sampled 25 wells, and then after we got those results, we moved up to 70 wells south of Route 9, 16 in Shaftesbury. And people who were impacted, you immediately got bottled water if you were more than twice the standard on the first sampling or more than the standard on a second confirmatory sampling. And then once we could get it arranged, point of entry treatment systems were the treatment of choice, and that's what ended up in many people's basements and is filtering the PFAS out of people's water. Based on those results, it looked like, wow, there's a lot more contaminated wells south of Route 9 than we originally thought, and the results look pretty clear that we should continue to reach out. So with the town's assistance, we got all the property owners' names that were not on municipal water and sent letters to everyone asking them to allow us to come to their homes and sample their well. And based on that, we sent out about 200 letters. We got 131 homes that we went in and sampled. In Shaftesbury, we expanded from the 16 original wells up to 24, and most of those wells are over on the edge of the Green Mountains over on East Road, going up into Shaftesbury. And we had different environmental consulting companies that we have under contract assisting us in doing the day-to-day work. And then we get reports on those, and we have to evaluate that and try and figure out, how extensive is the problem, where else do we need to go sampling, and, where's this stuff coming from? So those are all the next efforts that were undertaken. So this is what the original sampling looked like. If you look on the bottom left, you see a bunch of blue, green, and orange dots. Those are levels of concentration, and those are mostly in that South Shire, Terrace Road, and the neighborhoods over by the hospital. But there was another grouping where there were private wells over on the east side of Bennington, right before you go up the mountain on Route 9, and that's the Hickory Hill. I always want to make sure I get it. Hickory Hill Road. And I think there's 6 or 7 homes that we've tested there, and they've all had PFAS in them. So there's that Stonehenge Southshire and Hickory Hill, as we mentioned. We also put on this map, you might see the landfills, Burgess Brother landfills. One's a Superfund site, one's a C&D. We did a lot of work, we've done a lot of work and are continuing to do work to determine the extent of PFAS on the landfill, coming off the landfill, and whether or not they could be impacting these residences. And I'll get to the conclusions when we get to that part of the talk. So then as we expanded, you can see there are a lot more dots here. We got a lot more homes in the center along Stream Road and some of those areas, and then much further south in Bennington. And I remember very early on getting calls from someone down by the fish hatchery was that southeast side of Bennington, and they were very patient. I said, we're not sampling there yet, but if the data leads us there, we'll be down to sample. And sure enough, it did, and we've gone down there. I did mention the colors. Blue is non-detect, green is less than 20, the state standard, orange is greater than 20, and anything greater than 100, like this red dot down here, comes in as red, but that actually, upon further investigation, we found that home had some PFAS in the water system piping itself, and with additional work, we determined that it was in the pressure tank, but not getting into the home where people were drinking the water. Shaftesbury looks very similar. As I said, it's off East Road. That's maybe a half mile to 3/4 of a mile up into Shaftesbury. We see that same low-level dispersed, some non-detects, some detects, and that information comes in important as we try and evaluate what the source might be. So we asked our consultants as they did the work to identify potential sources. Pretty interesting. Different consultants came up with different lists. That's probably not that unusual, given that there are so many potential sources for PFAS. But for the South Bennington work, the potential sources that they identified were the former ChemFab facility, which we all know about that, the landfills, which I mentioned already, and then also possibly, just because of the possibility of using AFFF, they included the Bennington Rural Fire Department. We have since reached out to them. They've never purchased Class B foam. They've never used Class B foam. That's where the PFAS would come from. And so based on that, we've clearly ruled them out as a potential source. But that's kind of how you go into these investigations. You look at every source you can, and then you try and start weeding ones out that we don't think could be the source. For the Shaftesbury one, the consultant, as I said, came up with a slightly different list. They also came up with the former ChemFab facility, but they also said that perhaps private septic. We know that septic systems can release PFAS, and our septic systems do a great job of breaking down biological waste and even some other types of waste, but they're not particularly good at breaking down PFAS. So if you did put large amounts of PFAS into your septic system, it could get to the water table and impact your well or someone else's well. So they identified that. The Shaftesbury landfill, which very early on we realized is not a likely source for the homes we're looking at. These are higher in elevation, and we had already done work at the Shaftesbury landfill to figure out the extent of contamination there. The former Bennington landfill, which again, I think we're kind of ruling that out. Kosher Drive landfill, which is right downtown. That doesn't make sense that it's going way up there. And then this unreported Shaftesbury dump. We've heard a number of stories of a dump up in those neighborhoods. We've never really been able to locate exactly where that might be, but we've done some work to try and figure out if that's a possibility. So what are the conclusions that we drew and the next steps that we can take? So we used a couple different evaluation mechanisms, and I can get into more detail if people are interested. But we believe that at least some of the impacts we're seeing in all these wells is from the former ChemFab facility. So it does say next step, but we've actually already had a meeting with Saint-Gobain to present our findings and let them know that we think they're a potential source. We're doing more work. We have to do more work with them to move that process along. And then continued monitoring. And we're not sure exactly what that's going to look like, but I think we all know that we need to come back out and do more monitoring for a variety of reasons, both homes that we haven't sampled and then resampling some of the homes that we've already sampled. But there's a lot of steps that go into making that happen, and we'll have to go through those one by one. So how did we conclude that Saint-Gobain is the most likely source? That PFAS signature I mentioned, that ratio of PFOA to PFHPA, it's pretty consistent in all these wells that we're looking at. There were some other outliers that kind of made me question at first, but looking at the preponderance of all the data, it's pretty clear that ratio is pretty consistent, both in central Bennington, where we've already done all the work in 2016, 2017, and beyond, and in these other areas that we're talking about tonight. We've also rerun our air models to see if we think that what was being emitted from the factory could actually have gotten to those areas. And I think the conclusion is that it's at least a good potential that it could. And so based on that, and then also, as I mentioned, the well sampling results, that shotgun look, we saw the same thing in Bennington. There were areas where we didn't have any contamination. Other areas we had, high levels. Levels in general are lower because we're farther from the factory, but we see that shotgun on the maps that we saw before. So based on all that, that's the conclusion that we drew. And from that, we're going to bring up Jason and Stuart to talk about what the town is working on pertaining to water lines in the area. And I think, I have your map for you, Jay.
Hey, perfect. Stu, do you want to start?
Well, as usual, Richard has surprised me, but we've done this before. I think Bennington is very fortunate. Our water system appears to be able to serve most of the folks here who have contamination in their wells, and I'll hope Jason will second that when he gets up here. But that is truly what we think is the ultimate solution for most of the people in Bennington who are having these high levels of PFAS in their wells. And so we continue to make that offer to the state. The state has been working with us. They are the funding source for this work and will continue to be as soon as things straighten out in Washington. But we are very, very hopeful that we'll be able to serve all of you in Bennington that are having these problems. And I'll turn it over to Jason, just let him give you the engineering aspect.
Thank you, Stu. I'll try not to bore you with too much of the details. As Stu mentioned, I'm Jason Dolmich with MSK Engineers. We've done a lot of work with the town and particularly the water system. Sorry. It sounds loud to me from here, so I apologize. So what we've completed to date is a feasibility analysis of the early results, the area of the early results, which includes what I would call Stonehenge, the upper Stonehenge, the section that doesn't have water, the South Shire, Monument Avenue extension out to Route 7 South, and then Route 7 South from Monument Avenue extension north to the area where there is existing water on Route 7 South. And then also the small section that includes Hickory Hill. So to date, that feasibility analysis was completed with emerging contaminants funds. We applied for, with the select board's approval, to get the funds for design for that portion. Those are nearly approved. It's with the last step, and that's coming through the Water Infrastructure Division's Emerging Contaminants Grant funding. So this additional design work is having no impact on the ratepayers. That process, even though the funding is not fully secured, it's essentially there. So we've started the work on that. So if you're in any of those regions, you may have seen our survey crew out there. They've been completing survey work over the winter time. And then as well, we will shortly be making outreach letters to those specific areas in the first round of contaminated wells. So when you receive letters from our office for that, that's the engagement we're looking for, is just to get into the home, figure out where your water system comes in, and figure out an appropriate route to connect to municipal water if that's what you so desire to do. We've also applied for a priority list. We've applied for the priority list application for the state's funding. As Richard mentioned, they are pursuing a different funding avenue, which is through potential polluters, but as a stopgap measure, because emerging contaminants funds exist through the bipartisan infrastructure bill, that we are trying to get funding through that for construction. The portion that's been evaluated so far is approximately $13 million, so it's not a small sum of money. But if we are funded, then we can proceed to construction once the design is complete for that area and all the permits are in place. With respect to the remaining portion, the other southeastern portion that Richard was speaking about, that the results were found later, we have to go through the same process. We're currently finalizing a scope of work for that area. There's a couple more complicating factors in there that we're going to be looking at. And then as soon as that process is done, we'll proceed in the same method that I just described for the first portion of the area. That's the end of my presentation, and I think at some point we'll all take questions.
And much like what we did in Bennington, even though this is a slightly different funding source, at least at the moment, assuming funding can be acquired to build these systems, any place where a major water line goes by, whether your well's contaminated or not, you will be offered to be connected as part of the project. So we'll be reaching out to people who both have contaminated wells above standards, below standards, and without any contamination. And people who choose not to connect, there will be a dead-end water line put out at the street, and at some future date, if they want to connect, they can do so on their own time. So that's kind of the water line work, and I think actually we're on to questions. So I guess we would ask that people come up to the microphone and that we're being taped. If you really don't want to, you don't have to, but it would be. And if you just tell us who you are, and then we'll do the best we can to answer your question.
Hi, I'm Julie Hunter, and I live in Shasbury. We've lived there for about 24 years. And last year, they did a random check on everybody in our neighborhood. Well, actually, one person in our neighborhood got the check. We were not notified. We actually just found out word of mouth that his level was high, so we contacted the state, and then we were tested, and we were high. It has since, we've got a new system. They came in, we immediately got bottled water. I guess my question to you is that before, you had said before 2019, you had done some random checks?
No. Back in 2016,
Okay.
An individual was at a presentation at Bennington College about Hoosick Falls. And someone in the audience said, wow, we have a factory right down the hill. It was just like the factory in Hoosick Falls. Maybe somebody should come and test.
Okay.
That message made it up and down, and I was targeted to come down and do, I think at my first round I sampled 7 wells and found that all 7 of them had PFAS in them. And then over 2016, 2017, we just expanded that sampling out all the way as far as we could, where we thought it made sense at that time.
Sure.
Then the random sampling that occurred, I think, was in 2020. Was it 2021, maybe even? 21? So that was a random statewide sampling for a totally different purpose than a specific location. We have sites that we manage down in Pownell that have PFAS in them. We've been working with impacted parties down there from different factories. But this random testing, we have found maybe 2.5% of all the wells in the state are above standard, of the random sampling that was done. And that opened up a bunch of hazardous waste sites that were doing the same thing there that we've done here, and they're in different communities all over the state.
So I guess, one of my biggest concerns is, we've lived there for 24 years. I raised my children there, and I just wonder, how long have our levels been high? How do you determine, I guess, the area in which you test and you stop, right? Because you had said you'd stopped the testing. So how do you determine?
Well, I'll do the best I can to explain that. And in full disclosure, I wish I had made a different decision than I made, but let's see. Where's that map? Okay. If you see on this map, there are these bigger dots, and then there are these smaller dots. All of these smaller dots were ones that we sampled back in 2016. They were more over here. And then we don't have Shasberry out here, but there are another dozen up there that we did. And based on that, it didn't look like the problem extended into those neighborhoods. And unfortunately, I didn't go to any of the homes that we're sampling now, and I didn't come to your home, or I would have drawn a different conclusion had we obviously gone to that area. The factory's been closed since 2002. Its largest production year was 1998. There's every reason to suspect that there's been PFAS in the ground, around the county since at least that time and maybe before.
Right.
So I can't answer your question directly because I don't know, but
Right.
I'll tell you what I do know, and those are the facts of what I know.
Yeah, well, thank you. Just one more quick question.
Sure.
So we're on Furnace Brook Road, and that's, is that where the green dots were? Because we were 24 at one point, 25.
You're going to have to come up and show me which one. Yeah, so that's
Shasberry,
going to be
yeah.
up off the map.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
That was that other map I showed you.
Yeah, I thought they were green, but we
No,
were,
there's a mishmash, again, that mishmash pattern we see. But
Yeah.
there are maybe 5 or 6 wells that we tested that were over 20 in Shaftesbury.
Yeah.
And
one.
most of the rest of them were less than 20, and a
Okay.
few non-detects.
yeah,
So it's that hodgepodge of, I think
Right.
that kind of made us think it's indicative of an atmospheric. Just kind of gets spread out, and then how it moves into the ground, and it determines which wells are impacted.
okay. Thank you.
Thanks for your question.
Hi. Can you explain, please, the state determination of 20 parts per trillion, like exactly clearly what it means, how the state gets there, and what it's based on? Is it based on like the average adult? Is it based on a child? That kind of thing.
Okay, so the short answer to your question is no. But I'll do the best I can with what little I know, and I think there's some people who maybe know more about this particular issue than I do. I was not involved with a lot of that. That's determined by the health department.
Okay.
I believe they were looking at a child who was breastfeeding, thinking they'd get the highest doses. And so it's set as a most protective standard for our most protective people in society. Having said that, there's every reason to believe that standards are probably going to go down.
Okay.
Based upon further research that's been done by some of our national partners. But until that happens, we have what we have. So, I've given this talk to many people. If I've spoken to you before, you probably heard me say it. If it's below 20, I can't do anything directly to help you, but you can do things to help yourself.
Okay.
And I encourage you to take every step you can if you're concerned to minimize your exposure.
Okay. Thank you.
Great.
Hi, I'm George Schmidt, Southshire Drive. We're one of the original tested positive 20 to 2030. I want to thank the state for getting in there quickly and giving us bottled water and the pellet system. I am concerned about the schedule. We'd certainly like to have town water brought in, and I guess we would like to be on record as supporting this, and if there's any congressional delegation we have to talk to, or maybe a group in the town could get together, or our neighborhood association could support this. We'd certainly work with Stu and Dan Monks and whoever else in the town, and Jason, because we'd like to see it happen. Is there a schedule? Do you have a kind of a concept for when you might get funding? And obviously, construction is seasonal and
Yeah, so.
unknowns and contracts.
Like I said, we've, at least for the portion that you're in, and the areas outside of Southshire are a little bit further away, ways off. But with respect to that, the region that was identified first, we are already in design. The way that we got there was by completing the feasibility, and then we took that feasibility and parlayed that into another loan application. And when I use the word loan in this condition, they're fully reimbursable loans. And so based on the nature of the contaminant that is present that we're solving for, that the town approved, the select board approved the loan application for that, and then the state approved that loan. It's now it still has to go through the bond bank in order to get approval. So that's locked in design, so the design is covered, the feasibility was covered. That's why we also, even though we haven't completed the design, we knew that the next step was to apply for a priority list application. Those were due, I believe, at the end of last month. So we submitted those, and we don't know yet whether that application will be funded. It's going to be based on what other competition there is out there for those specific funds. And so if we see that priority list application be funded, then we can then set the schedule for construction. If it's not, we're going to be fairly heavily dependent on other sources of funding. And I don't know one way or the other which way we're going to go right now, but at least what I can say is that design is funded. We've started proceeding with that work because we want to get a jump start on the schedule. Our goal is to be complete before the funding is made available. So sometime probably late summer or fall. Our goal will be to wrap those up as well. But permitting is permitting, design is design. We're going to move it as far along as we can, as quickly as possible. But so that's and it's going to depend a lot on. This requires public participation, so I would just encourage you to engage with our staff when they reach out to you.
So it's a year, 2 years, 3 years? Just a guesstimate.
No, all I can say is that the design work is going to be done in 2025. That is, I'm fairly certain of, and the ability for us to proceed out and engage with contractors is going to be dependent on funding. So if funding is approved, then we can start that process, and you could begin construction as early as next year. If we do not have a funding source, then I really can't say when that's going to happen because it's going to be dependent on that. I mean,
So from the time someone says, here's money, to the water getting hooked up at our house to the Southshire, it's going to be...
how long? It's a $13 million project. The likelihood is that will get broken up into a few construction contracts. So it's usually larger than what a single contractor can handle, so we'll break it up into smaller pieces, and with the goal of having them run concurrently. The majority of the equivalent work, that was probably a 2-year process, so it was 2 construction seasons. And then and the service lines are usually at the end, right? Because you have to have the whole system up and working before you can start connecting customers, so the customers get it at the end. But so that'll, in a perfect world, I'd put this out to bid in September. We'd be under construction, depending on the season. People would we would make it flexible because we want to get competitive bids and get good contractors. So because it's sort of towards the tail end of the season, we're going to probably give them a little bit of flexibility to start at the end of this construction season or the beginning of next. And then it would probably take more than 1 construction season to fully complete the project. But like I said, right now, that schedule is highly dependent on the money coming through. Yeah.
Hi there, thanks for being here tonight, I appreciate it. I'm with neighbors from Shaftesbury Lower East Road, and just wanted to mention that one of the homes isn't even on your map, so that they're going to follow up with you on that, just so that that doesn't get lost in the soup here.
Sounds good.
Several questions. So is there anybody representing Shaftesbury here tonight that we can speak to about what's happening in our neighborhood, as you gentlemen just mentioned?
You mean as far as
Representing the town
elected
for an
officials?
action plan.
There is not.
And why is that? Do we know?
I don't know. It's possible it's an oversight on my part. Oh, maybe there is.
Okay, can you help us?
May I? Yeah. And stay, please.
I'm going to stay right here.
Okay, yep.
Take your line.
I'm not representing the town, but I live in Shaftesbury and represent Shaftesbury in the State House. David Durfee, State Representative, and I apologize for walking in during your opening comment, Secretary Moore.
Thank you for being here.
I would be pleased to have a conversation with anybody from Shaftesbury. I can't answer the question of why there's nobody from the town here tonight, whether they were invited or not. I know that there's a select board meeting happening right now in Shaftesbury, so maybe they were and weren't able to make it. I'm just going to take the opportunity while I'm here at the microphone to ask, and it may be a question for Jason, and again, understanding that you're working with the town of Bennington and not Shaftesbury, but your last slide, or close to your last slide, Jason, said that you weren't in a position yet, from an engineering standpoint, to know whether the town's system could be expanded over the line into Shaftesbury. And I wondered if you could elaborate on that, and maybe also whether you've had any conversations, whether the town of Bennington has had any conversations with Shaftesbury.
I can say that we have not looked at that, but like I said, we are in the, we're finalizing our scope of work. So this is a conversation that we can have and see whether those areas are areas we may serve. I really can't speculate because availability to serve is based on a lot of factors. And these are sort of on the outer areas of the system right now. And without being completely familiar with how proximate they are to the existing system, it would be hard for me to speculate.
The section in pink at the top of the map is East Road, I think?
Correct.
And it ends at the Shaftesbury line. Is that an existing part of the system?
There's a small, so that was one of the sections, the area just below it, and it was extended, and the area just above it, that's a small pressurized system. So a lot of these areas either are fed from the plant or they're fed by different holding tanks in the system. That one's fed by a small pressure system because it's a small diameter line and there's a few houses on it.
Yeah. And was that a new section of the system added since 2016?
Yes, yeah. We had phase one, which was sort of on the western portion of the system, and then phase two was on the eastern side.
Thank you.
David, I can tell you that we've not had any conversations with the Select Board in Shaftesbury or the administration in Shaftesbury about extending municipal water. Historically, we've had conversations about extending municipal sewer, but that's on the North Bennington end of things, but nothing about the water yet.
So we have a distribution list that we invited everyone to this meeting for, and that did include the town and their webpage. Bennington, not necessarily Shaftesbury. I have to look into that. I'm not positive on that, as well as some of the local newspapers. I know there are people in Shaftesbury on that distribution list, but I have to go to the list to see if select board members are part of that or not.
May I ask, sir, you said that there's been no communication with Shaftesbury. You've made that invitation. What's the timeline to push that? Do we as neighbors need to go to our town hall and say, knock, knock, listen up? I mean, we're drinking water, and it seems as though Shaftesbury is just us on Lower East Road. We're just good luck. So there's a few of us that, if you can just explain to us roughly what that timeline is. I know you have no crystal ball nor a magic wand, but we're feeling pretty left out of it. So if you could help with that, thank you.
I think we would have to have, one of your, perhaps your administrator could reach out to me. We can have those conversations. I would rely on Jason and his advice as to whether or not we can actually extend our water system in that location. It's a higher elevation. It's further away from our true sources, and it becomes more and more difficult to provide ample pressure and therefore ample chlorine disinfection potentials.
But that discussion has not happened, am I correct? There's been no communication,
none on the water
outreach
system
to Shaftesbury nor back from Shaftesbury for the option?
No, absolutely not.
So what are we recommended? What do you suggest that we
Well,
do for
I would
Shaftesbury
suggest that your
residents?
town administrator reach out and have some conversations.
Okay.
I can have a conversation with Jason about the possibilities of getting it up there, but I think it will be difficult. I think from an engineering perspective, it's going to be harder and harder for us to continue to push our water further and further out from the sources. I'm amazed that we've been able to do what we've done with our system, but have your administrator contact me.
Well, from your experience, so let's say that the water line could not be extended. I'm no engineer for that, but I understand what you're saying. What are the options then for communities? We're certainly not the first community that's not been able to have a water line extended. What are the options for us?
Well, I think there might be two options for you. One is to continue with the POET system, which is a long-term option. It's a maintenance option, but it's a long-term solution. The other option, and this, I'm speaking way out of turn here because I don't represent the North Bennington water system, but North Bennington's reservoir is up off of the Chapel Road, and their water feeds down through the town of Bennington to the village of North Bennington. I don't know whether that would factor into potential, and as far as I know, their source is not contaminated. So there may be an opportunity to work through the village of North Bennington. Well, it's not really, it's the water system of the village of North Bennington. Has a separate board. It's different than the way.
We won't mention your name.
Oh, you can mention my name. Everybody,
But thank you
you
for
can take my name in vain if
Yeah.
you wish. It's okay. It happens all the time.
And I'm sorry, I do have a couple more questions. I know I don't want to hold you all up, but this is pretty important to us.
Absolutely, that's why we're here.
So doing a little bit of background on this, and your deck was wonderful, thank you for that information. It seems as though we already have some legal blocks that have been signed with the Bennington companies that took credit, shall we say, for the contamination. So legally, they are not subject to any more payouts. So where does that leave us?
So that's actually not correct.
That's what I read on the state website.
The settlement that was undertaken is, we cannot bring suit against the Saint-Gobain Performance Plastics for any additional work within the area that was identified.
Oh, within that area. Oh,
But these
okay.
areas are outside that area.
Okay, great,
And
thank
so
you.
we have open dialogue with them to see what they might be able to do, if they are willing to accept either liability or funding. I think even in our settlement, they didn't accept liability, they just agreed to fund all of the work that was undertaken all those years, and they still are. We have about 150 homes in Bennington and North Bennington that we continue to sample, and about 35 of those homes have POETs on them. So that's a long-term commitment, and they're on until the job is done, which could be a while.
And what is the plan? What is the timeline plan for Shasberry for those of us on Lower East Road? When's the next testing? How many tests do we need to go through? If you can kind of give us that phase plan,
Sure.
that would be really helpful.
So the short answer is I don't know, because like so many other things, we have to have funding, we have to have the logistics and all that. Having said that, we have started discussion for getting out and doing another round of sampling in homes that we haven't sampled that we think potentially could be at risk, resampling homes that have been sampled. Anyone who has a treatment system, like I think you said your home does?
We do not.
You do not?
We don't
Okay.
know. I don't know what we have to do to get one.
Get above
That's why I'm trying, that's
get
my
above
next
20.
question, and I'm done.
It's not a great, it's not a great way to win a prize, but
Yes. But the EPA is changing that. to Vermont.
so those homes we continue to sample to make sure those systems are operating properly. But we know we need to go back and sample homes again, and it's just a question of whether we're going to do it, whether we're going to be able to convince perhaps Saint-Gobain to do it, or to make sure that we have the funding and the contractors to be able to do it. So don't have an exact answer for you. We're working on it, and as soon as we know, we'll let you know, and it won't be, I'm not talking like a year from now. It'll be much shorter than that. We'll
And
have
how
an
will we
answer.
be notified, as I found out about this through a neighbor walking down the street? Will we really be sent a letter or emailed? Will we be communications happen?
Sure.
This time?
So your home's been sampled before?
Yes.
And you did not get a notice of this meeting?
I got a notice of the meeting. I never got a notice that there was an issue in our neighborhood.
Gotcha.
I just want to be sure that everyone's informed because,
Sure.
not everyone has been. I'll put
Sure.
it that way.
Well, and again, we don't know how extensive it is. I got a call from a gentleman in Colchester who was asking me about the sampling in Bennington, and I felt pretty confident knowing that I couldn't tie those together and sample that. So we are going to continue to expand our sampling. Exactly where that's going to be at this point, I'm not sure.
And so you're not committing to those of us who have had the sample and we're within the range, you're not committing to when another sample is going to be done. am I
An
correct?
exact date? No, I just don't know.
Not even a like, maybe sort of?
I would think,
don't know. Just
from the discussions that we've had so far, most likely late spring, early summer.
And so if you were those of us that are experiencing this right now in your home, what would you be doing? What can we do, since you all are the pros, you three gentlemen there? What do you recommend as folks who are, yeah, it's not funny to us, sorry, it might be funny to you, but it's really not to us. Thank you.
No, he's laughing, you call him a pro, that's what he was laughing at.
Well, I hope so, you're here, right? So, what do you recommend, or can you not do that because of your position?
No, I can't recommend anything, but I can make suggestions. And anything that will reduce your exposure is beneficial. You can buy bottled water. You can put a treatment system under your sink. Some people have done that. Brita filters even work to remove some, but how long they do, no one knows. I talked with a gentleman who runs a company, lab company, who has low levels of PFOA in his well. He did some tests using his carbon filter in his refrigerator, and that removed a certain amount of PFOA from his water. So everything you do can minimize your exposure. So any steps you can take to do that, if you're concerned, are steps that can only help you to have lower exposure.
Okay, thank you for answering my questions. I appreciate your time.
Sure. I'll probably get in trouble for that too, but that's okay.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Melody Niles. I'm actually a neighbor of Julie Hunter in Furnaceburg Road in Shasberry. And we originally found out word of mouth too that the testing was going on. So Julie has received a filter, and my neighbor across the street has received a filter. And we're at like 14.8, and so we don't qualify for a filter.
Correct.
But I thought the EPA dropped the numbers to what was satisfactory, but Vermont has different numbers, or is that still, they're not jiving together?
It's kind of apples, it's all water that people drink, don't get me wrong, but
Right.
it's apples and oranges. EPA's number is the maximum contaminant level, and that's for public water systems. The state of Vermont is working on the first regulations that will update with new numbers, will be our public drinking water rules, and they'll come in with the lower standard that EPA has promulgated. It'll take a little longer for the health department to go through, and they may or may not come up with 4 as a number. It could be lower, it could be higher. It just depends on the evaluations that they undertake and the assumptions that they make. Having said that, if they do come in, it's more likely to come in lower than higher.
Okay, so we're just kind of like waiting, kind of in limbo till we hit like, because we're 14.8, so we wait to see if we hit 20.
And again, we have to go by the rules that we have and the
Right.
standards that we have, but anything you can do to, if you're concerned, anything you can do to minimize your exposure in the interim,
Yeah,
I
I'm very
think.
concerned because we have a young Springer Spaniel, and she's got bladder and kidney problems galore, and she's just a baby, so, yeah, I'm very concerned about it. All right,
I mean,
thank
it's a
you very
totally
much.
unsatisfactory answer for us to give you, to be like, buy bottled water or something, but
Right.
that's all, unfortunately, all I can do.
All right, thank you.
Hello.
Hi there. First of all, thank you all so much for your work and for coming out here. Really appreciate it. My name is Haley Jones. I use they, them pronouns, and I am an environmental health organizer working all across Vermont and New Hampshire. So I have one question for you, and then I'm going to turn around. You're going to hate me. You had mentioned open conversations with St. Gobain and the potential of convincing them to take some sort of financial or even legal responsibility. Are you allowed to answer what sense you have of our ability to convince them to take that on?
It's a process. In the previous examples that we had, we negotiated in good faith with them for a period of time, maybe a year, and a little less. And they came around and we settled our first consent decree in 2017. And then as we discovered more problems and did more negotiating, filed another one or settled another one in 2019. So relatively quick in the world of environmental science. Many of these lawsuits can drag on for decades. So in that regard, it was good. Whether that happens here, I can't say. I can say what we think and steps we'll take if necessary, all the steps that the law allows us to undertake if we get there. But ultimately, they have to speak for themselves, and the work that they're doing and the evaluations that they're doing. They have very good consultants, environmental consultants, just like we do, and they're going to take a hard look at all the data and come out with a recommendation. And then Saint-Gobain will have to decide how they want to proceed on that. So we should know more in maybe 6 months or a year as far as that goes, or maybe sooner if things go perfectly. But it's a process, and I am in contact with them all the time. We talk every month.
I believe it.
So
Thank you.
We still have a lot of homes we're dealing with, and now we're going to have even more potentially. So
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
you're welcome.
Like I said, I'm a community organizer. Our specialty is taking aim at polluters and holding them accountable for their actions and building up local power. So the DEC is doing incredible work. My job is to convince very aggressively polluters like Saint-Gobain to take accountability. So if you're feeling riled up, if you're feeling really concerned, if you're feeling alone, come see me afterwards. Like I said, I work on pulling groups together to hold polluters accountable. So once again, thank you so much to the DEC for all their work today.
Thank you.
Hi, Ezra Feldman. I live on Monument Ave Extension. This is a really simple, narrow question, I think. But am I understanding the town of Bennington's plan correctly to try to extend municipal water to all town of Bennington homes? There was a slide that said impacted homes, and then there was discussion about the testing level, but then I heard Jason say, if the water line is going past you, then you'll be given access. So I'm just trying to understand.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
So we're, all homes in Bennington, we are not extending. I mean, we've extended water lines to a lot of homes in Bennington as a part of the last process. The part of the area that we are currently in design for is the portion, the little triangle from like Stonehenge, bounded by Monument Avenue Extension and Route 7 South, where there isn't water systems already, and then the little section with Hickory Hill. So right now, those are the portions that are currently under design. So if you're in that area, we've determined that there is a feasible way to provide those residents with water, and that we are in the process of proceeding with the detailed design work to figure out how to get it into your home. Outside of that area, the state, after we submitted the feasibility, a grant application essentially, the state continued to find additional contaminants outside of the area of study. And so we are expanding the scope of work through another grant to determine whether we can provide water to those areas. And so until I'm done with that assessment, I don't really want to predict what we're going to determine. I think these are fairly remote areas, so it's going to be, it's going to be an interesting challenge to figure out how to provide water safely to those regions, fresh water safely. So that's the extent to which we're in detailed design. We're evaluating the other contaminated areas in Bennington, but that's going to be under another step. Okay.
Not to steal Jason's thunder, because he's really the water expert and I'm not, but this is much what we did in 2017 and 2019, 2016 in the rest of Bennington. We had to go through the evaluations. Can we get the pressure? Can the water be fresh enough that the chlorine doesn't break down? And then can we find the funds to connect all these homes? I think we spent about $40 million, and most of it was Saint-Gobain money, but not all of it, to extend the water lines that we extended so far. And if we tried to extend water to all the homes that have been impacted, we'd be looking at a similar number. And as I mentioned, there are still homes that are outside that area that it's too far, the water gets too old. It costs $1 million to connect one person. We've got, the cost benefit, people look at that, the people who are paying for it mostly, and we've decided, for better or for worse, that we'll go with point of entry treatment systems. There is one other thing that we've done. About 9 homes so far in Bennington, we've drilled new wells and tried to tap into different aquifers to get them clean water. That's met with mixed success. I think 6 of those homes came in perfectly. 2 had naturally occurring uranium in them. One of them we could get it out, but the other one we couldn't, and so it was easier to treat the PFAS than it was the uranium, and we kept the old well. And then one home over on Orbed Road, the new well was just as contaminated as the old well. So, there's a lot going on in the ground that we don't fully understand, but we're pushing them to continue to look at more homes of these 35 homes I mentioned that have treatment systems, we're continuing to evaluate them on a case-by-case basis to see where we think it makes sense if we can get fresh water.
Hi, that's a great lead-in, talking about drilling some new wells. You talked about testing some wells that sort of fell within acceptable standards. There's some folks here, I think, that were in that situation. You also talked about PFAS sort of migrating and how that happens. Is there any reason to believe that the levels of PFAS in like a particular source might fluctuate? And if so, like how quickly and how significantly?
So we know they fluctuate. It's a great lead-in. We're working with Bennington College and some of their professors and students to do an evaluation of all the data that we've accrued over the last 9 years, and to evaluate whether those levels overall or in particular areas are going up or going down or staying the same. And so they're in the middle of they have all the data, they've got it all lined up, they're in the middle of doing all those statistics. And I think within the next month or so, we'll probably send out another notice for a meeting either at Bennington College or here. I'm not sure where it's going to be. But also there'll be like a Zoom link if people just want to stay home and see it. And they'll be talking about those changes. What we know so far is some go up and some go down, and there's no real rhyme or reason that we've been able to determine.
And how significantly have you seen them sort of go up?
You don't see significant changes, but we've had a number of wells that were below 20 that went above 20, and we've had a number that were above 20 that have gone below 20 as part of that natural fluctuation. And so in the order that we have with St. Gobain, they have to, once levels are going down, they actually have to go through a very rigid sampling protocol and very detailed statistics to show that it's continuing to go down before they're allowed to remove their treatment system, which they have done on a few homes. And then once they do that, they still continue to sample it as part of the routine sampling of all the homes in the area that we're looking at.
So a home that originally tested low will also continue to be sampled?
Yes, even non-detects. We've probably half those homes, half those 150 have been non-detect every time we've sampled them. And someday they'll come in and ask to reduce sampling or stop sampling, but that day's not today.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Ashley Brennan Jowett. I live on Route 7 South, about, from what I can tell by your map, 100 yards south of your southernmost testing spot. So my question, I have a few questions. One of them is, who's in charge of what wells get tested and when?
Well, I don't know if in charge is the right word, but I'll probably be the one making the recommendations for where we should expand or not expand sampling.
Please test my well.
Okay. So I've gotten a lot of requests, even here, and please send me an email with your address and contact information. And what I can promise you is I will be in touch with you. I can't tell you at this point whether we'll be sampling your well. I have also spoken with dozens of people about sampling their wells themselves. And I'm not saying you should do that or you shouldn't do that, but if that's something you're interested in, I can also help you through that process.
I've actually called, and it would be like $800 to $1,000.
We can find one that's a little cheaper than that for
Okay.
you. Or actually a lot cheaper.
Okay.
And they
great.
still do good work.
And then you mentioned installing an under-sink system.
Mm-hmm.
Who does that work? Is it like a plumber, and what would I ask for?
So you could probably talk to a plumber. You might be better off talking to a water treatment company like Clearwater Filtration or Culligan. Most of the systems in Bennington, Culligan is the vendor that does that. Culligan of Vermont, I think they're called.
Okay.
And there's probably more. You know, if you just go to Google it, there'll probably be more in this area, especially like with Albany being right over there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Barb Raskin from Bennington on Morgan Street Extension. We were one of the homes that got the POET system. Thank you very much for your quick response to our above 20 level. So far, the testing that's been done post-installation has been covered by the state.
Mm-hmm.
Since we're pretty far out in Morgan Street Extension, I have that feeling that we may be beyond the reach of waterline extensions. It's hard to predict that. But if we do have long-term POET and require the monitoring, how long might we expect that the state will be covering the testing that we have to do every 6 months?
Yeah, it's like every question, funds available, right? So currently we do still have some funding to continue to do that testing. When we see the end date of that, we'll have to make some requests to see if there are additional funds that can be acquired. If not, and in that process, we would notify you that that's going on and that there's a potential we'd have to stop. And at some point, if we don't have funds and we don't have a responsible party to pick up doing that work, then you'd have to make your own decision on. And we'll certainly write some information sheets to kind of advise for how you could do that. But I can't. I wish I had a better answer for you. I don't. That's the answer I have. So.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Richard. Leslie Addison. As you know, we went through this living above ChemFab. I don't know if the Department of Health is here, and I'm trying to remember back when we were all learning that we were exposed, when the Department of Health came forward and offered blood testing for people who know that they have exposure. So I'm curious what the status of that might be, and is there a conversation going on?
As far as the conversation, there is not. The health department, to the best of my knowledge, and I don't want to speak for them, does not believe we get a lot of value from doing those particular tests. And the tests that were done in 2016, there is a report on their webpage, and it shows a very strong correlation between what's in your water and what's in your blood. If you know what's in your water, you can almost know with a good level of certainty what's in your blood. I understand, and there might be someone here who works for the hospital, that Bennington Hospital does do blood testing now. They are doing it as part of the tort settlement. But I think they have taken a few other people, and I had the number and the people you contact for that, but I'd have to go back and find it. So if anyone's interested in that, feel free to send me an email, and I'll try and get you the information on how to proceed. And I think if you spoke with your physician and they recommended it, I don't know how that would work with insurance and things, but you could follow that as well.
Hi, I'm Janet Hallner. I live on Middle Pownell Road in Bennington. Our number was in the teens, and so we're getting bottled water. We don't have any kind of filtration system. Couple of questions. Are we likely at some point to be added to the water system if we are in the teens with our contamination somewhere down the road?
So as Jason was saying, the water system decisions are ones that are, they're in the beginning planning stages, and how far out they'll be able to go and how many homes would be connected. But if they decided to run a water main by your home, you would be eligible to connect at no cost to you.
Okay, and then the other question is, since we're having the bottled water, but we're showering in this water, is there a health danger to shower in water that's contaminated with PFOAs?
So exposure to any chemical can potentially cause a risk. The major route of exposure for PFAS is ingestion, so drinking the water is the number one. Is there no exposure when you shower? I can't stand here and say that. There is some very small. But if your number is below the standard and showering is your major exposure, it's going to be much less of a risk than drinking the water.
Okay, thank you.
And as far as your bottled water, we'll continue to supply that until we are convinced that either your level is never going to go above 20, or if your level does go above 20 on 2 consecutive sampling rounds, then we'll install POET. Again, funds available.
Thank you.
Sure.
Just have one.
Yeah, come on up.
So the bottled water that we have, I was a cheerleader, I can pretend. So the bottled water that we're getting, is that tested? What is that tested for? And is it, I know it's in plastic, of course, because we really don't want, but can you run over that? It's just a question I've always had.
Sure.
Is it safe drinking that?
So the health department does have a list on their webpage of bottled water companies that have had their water sampled. I think now almost all of them are required to sample for PFAS. There was a faux pas in New Hampshire where one of the bottled water companies had PFAS in their water. And once that was found out, of course, they took steps to eliminate that exposure. Many of your bottled water vendors run their water through carbon before they bottle it. And so even if you did have PFAS, most or all of that PFAS would be removed. But I know there's sampling going on, and if you have trouble finding that, reach out to me and I'll figure out where it is. You're welcome. Yes, sir.
And Sean Legacy, I guess I can, I'm sorry. Are you in line? I'll dovetail off Julie and Mel. I'm up in the Furnace Brook area too. And I think we had some pretty heated conversations back when Mike Madison, they knew that his well was contaminated. And I'm only like a half mile the way the crow flies from his house. And we discussed it, and you said, well, we got to draw the line somewhere. You know, that boy, did that piss me off, to be honest with you. And I said,
I apologize.
Why, huh? You probably
I
remember that
apologize.
now, right? So, and it just, you know, I'm disappointed that I drink that water all the time. For like Julie, we've been there 24 years as well. So now I'm like really concerned. You know, we just got the POET system put in probably 2 weeks ago. And when the gentleman was there, he goes, yeah, well, we'll test it, but then, you know, we're running out of funding, so you're going to have to buy your own filters and everything from now on. And I'm like, really? And I kind of feel like the others, like we're the little foster children up there that, you know, not in Bennington, but Shasbury's not even here representing us. So, you know, and how long does the POET system work for? Are people that get in the POET system, are they going on the, hooking up to this lines because it's a better solution? You know, all that's going to be. And then you said something about now you know that the marker is the same in Shasbury that it was in St. Cobain. And you said you have conversations with them. Would it be helpful if we all go after them together? And if they're not going, you say a year down the road, it just seems like you're pushing us away some more. You know what I mean? It's been that long, and we feel like we're in a corner with, you know, out there by ourselves.
Sure. Well, what I can say is we're going to continue to fight for you, whether that means finding funding to maintain POETs in homes that have exceedances. Again, as I answered earlier, we can't guarantee that, but we're going to fight for it as much as we can. As far as whether water can get up there, there's a whole, as you heard, there are many technical and financial issues associated with that. Can I say it won't happen? No. I mean, I am a very positive person. I've reached out to members of the community and said, let's shoot for as much as we think we can get, at least in the planning stages, to see, is it technically possible? How much does it cost? What would it all take? And then once we know all that, we can see if we can overcome those obstacles. So I don't know if that really answers all your questions, but I hear your frustration, and I do apologize.
Because I was ignored back then. You know, oh, no, the line's drawn right here, right in front of your house. Really? You know,
Yeah.
you test it yourself.
Well, and as you know, we have a bunch of homes, I forget what that little road, that little spur road. I was going to say the spur road. We have a bunch of wells that we tested on Spur Road that came back either below standards or non-detect. And so as we looked up that way, it looked like we were getting out of the area of contamination. Obviously, that was not accurate.
Yeah, they said, I was talking, I think the health said you can't even brush your teeth with it. You know, don't brush your teeth with it. The lady was saying about showers. We have 2 grandchildren who live with us. Don't have them take a bath. I mean,
Yeah, that's not going to work very well, is it?
You know, it's like, so that's where it gets frustration.
Sure. No, I understand. Yes, sir.
Hi, Richard. Jim Sullivan. We went through this ourselves a few years ago. I live with Leslie, who spoke earlier in the neighborhood that's on the hill just due east of the ChemFab site. So just to speak to a couple things that people have spoken to, like the concentrations in our neighborhood were generally a lot higher than the numbers you're talking about today. I think our well levels varied from about 270 to well over 400. So it could be a fair bit of variability, and that was far from the highest in our neighborhood. And so there's a fair bit of variability. I know bigger numbers is going to be a bigger numeric variability. But also, you know, as far as the health department's view on this, you know, it's not a simple correlation, higher number in the water, higher in your blood. It also depends very much on how long your exposure has been. Because people in our neighborhood had lived there for 2 years, and people in our neighborhood had lived there for 20 years, and the levels were a lot different based on both the exposure time and the concentrations in their water. So keep that in mind. Then the only other thing I would like to say is we've been through it all. You know, the initial exposure, the testing, the bottled water, the POET systems, the water line extensions, and happy to make ourselves available as resources if anybody wants to ask us our personal experience with the process, because like I said, with the help of the state and the town and the village of North Bennington, which are all great helps to us, I think we experienced it from A to Z. So,
great.
So feel free to grab us on the way out. Thanks.
Any other?
Question about soil.
Mhm.
I'm on a greenhouse, I'm not a district, and I have a fellow assistant coach. Thank you very much. But I do, I had a garden, I've had a garden. Is that feasible? Possible PFAS? How's that transferred into vegetables and things that you do?
So it's a very complicated question, and it could take me a while to get the full answer in. But PFAS, we did a statewide evaluation of background levels. So we went out into the forests, into parks where we didn't think there were any sources, and we found PFOA and PFOS, two of the most common and prevalent PFASs in soil in every sample we took. And we found many other PFASs in other soil samples. What we know from the testing we did around the ChemFab facility over in North Bennington was the closer you were to the factory, the higher the concentrations in your soils. There is PFAS uptake by vegetables. There are many papers on that. I have shared some of those with some of the neighbors over by the factory who had similar questions. I don't think there's any way you can get no exposure if you grow vegetables. It's in the soil and plants uptake it. Having said that, everyone in this room, even if you don't drink water with PFAS in it, has PFAS in your blood because it's in all these products. It's in our rugs and in the dust and in many other products. So levels have come down. I guess that's the good news over the last 30 years in background blood, but it's still there and it's in all of us and all of our kids. Obviously, the more exposure you get, the higher your levels, as Jim was saying. The longer you're exposed, the higher your levels. You reach some equilibrium. Whether that's safe or not, I don't think anybody can tell you with certainty, but I think in general, everyone would agree that the lower your exposure, the better off you are. But if you go somewhere else and buy vegetables, it's very likely they're going to have low levels of PFAS in those vegetables as well. Sombering. Anyone else?
Bradley Roy, Bennington, Vermont. If you have to hook up to town water, how is it fair to pay a quarter bill compared to, owning your own private well? It's more money to, pay for town water.
It probably is. However, you do get some benefits with that. You have reliable water even when the power's out. Your water is tested routinely, and so you know what's in your water that you're drinking. You have good pressure all the time. I live on a well. I have a very bad pressure tank. I have bad pressure. I don't complain. That's my well. That's my choice. But yeah, there is a cost, and there was an effort to try and take care of some of that for the people who were in the area of concern in the settlement of their tort case with St. Cobain. Some of that settlement money, I think, was supposed to go to offsetting some of the costs for buying municipal water. But there's no cost with having a well. There are costs associated with that too. So it's a problem that unfortunately I can't solve for the community. If you decide to hook up, you're accepting that responsibility to pay your water bill.
And if you decide not to hook up, how far away does the town main have to stay from your private well?
I don't know the answer to that question.
No one does the engineer?
I don't know, Mr. Ray.
I don't know. And then the other question is, in the past, if you have all perfect solder, water lines, and you have a so-called state master plumber come in and put, a pro press in, and, you have a problem, and they don't want to come back and take care of it, what's the warranty?
What was the warranty on water line?
Typical warranties for construction is 1 year.
1 year.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thanks for everyone for coming, and I know I'll stick around till the last person leaves. Others who are going farther might decide to leave a little earlier, but we're all available to answer questions if if you'd like to come up and talk one-on-one.